Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Lou. I just kind of wanted to bring to you today a video based on compression and understanding how it actually works. There's a ton of videos out there that show a lot of the functions and they're really good, but I just kind of wanted to elaborate on a few more things because there's some things that just kind of get lightly touched on. Now, before as always, I just kind of want to just say thank you for checking out the video. If there's anything in here that you like or if you thought is helpful, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment on what you learned, or if there's anything you think I could have touched on. Or if there's something I'm missing, just let me know. But let's kind of just jump into the video and get to things, right? Now, what is a compressor? Let's just kind of break it down in a very basic sense. It just actually helps you control the different amplitudes of any musical elements in a recording or mix, even in a master. But where does this actually become helpful? Compressors can be used to actually push things forward in a mix, back in a mix, or they can even make things sound bigger or smaller. Sometimes it can actually be used to enhance, tonal qualities too, where some compressors are just known to kind of add a little something in this range and others take away from another. So to understand how some of these actually help or take away from your mixes, we're going to kind of start going over some of the different parameters you'll find on most compressors and some that you won't find on many. Okay, so first thing to talk about is threshold. Every compressor has a threshold. Now, what the threshold is basically the marking point, usually measured in decibels, right? You say after 18 decibels, if the signal passes that, I want it to start engaging the compressor. Anything below it will not engage the compressor, but once you pass that threshold, those, let's say minus 18 decibels, anything above that will now start to engage the compressor. There are a couple plugins that actually help you kind of visualize this. One of my favorite ones to teach with is FabFilter Pro C2. Not only is it a good compressor to actually use, it's kind of like a go-to utilitarian kind of compressor, but it's fairly cheap on the market and it works on almost every DAW. I haven't heard of any DAW that FabFilter doesn't support right now. So go ahead and check them out if you want, but let's kind of just jump into it. So let's switch over. Okay, to start, shout out to Jalen Rants for letting me use his song Gemini to actually reference what's going on here for this video. So let's just play a little bit of the song while I pull up the plugin. I kind of want to show you how it actually picks up signal and what it looks like. All right, so playing the song over for now.
And it shows now, I'm saying, and I know that I'll be just fine if I leave this shit behind. No regrets in the words I say, I'm leaving you for me. And I know that I'll be just fine if I leave this shit behind. No regrets in the words I say, I'm leaving you for me.
Okay, dope. Great song. Thank you, Jalen, for letting us use this. But if you notice, this plugin, it looks a little complicated, but it really only has 4 main controls: threshold, ratio, attack, release. We'll get to all that soon enough. What is the threshold actually doing? Once again, we're just setting the value at which, after the signal passes a certain point, it's going to start reducing that signal. It's going to start applying the compression to the signal that passes over it. So now that we have a better understanding of threshold and that it only triggers once the signal has passed over the threshold, now ratio is basically saying, okay, how much of the compression do we want to apply? Now, a lot of people will see things like 2-to-1 ratio, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, whatever. Cool. What that basically means, for every 2 decibels that goes above the threshold, it will only allow it to actually output 1 decibel. You can see a 4-to-1 ratio as for every 4, you'll only get 1. You can look at this as percentages as well. For a 4-to-1 ratio, you're only getting 25% of it out. For a 2-to-1 ratio, you're only getting 50% of it out, right? So it's not necessarily that the ratio ultimately dictates the overall tone of the compressor. There's so many other factors that go into it. But depending on how much compression you're doing, the ratio that you set, you can actually affect the actual tone. A 2-to-1 ratio could be seen as more of a softer, more gradual compression because it's still giving you 50% back, right? While, let's say, a 6-to-1 ratio could be seen as aggressive, and if depending on the attack and release timing, it can make things snappier or something, but it's typically known as more of an aggressive tone. Okay, so jumping back into Pro Tools, we're just going to keep this 4-to-1 ratio on this, and we're going to apply this to the actual lead bus. Now, what I'm going to do is kind of just play with the threshold and kind of bring it down, and then we're going to see how much reduction is actually happening based on the ratio, okay?
And it shows now, I'm saying, and I know that I'll be just
With the 2 to 1, it's a gradually lower amount of reduction. If we do something like 10 to 1, you see it gets a lot more aggressive. So playing with the actual ratio will actually give you different properties of, like I said, tone. If we go into a 2 to 1 ratio, you'll hear that the vocal sounds a little bit smoother. So let's just kind of do that. We'll just put 2. Cool. And if we do something as aggressive, like I said, 6 to 1, you can actually hear that compression really kicking in on the voice. So usually for voices, I tend to live around like 2 to 1, 3 to 1. But if you're doing other things, let's say like a snare or kick drum, and you really want to hear that aggressive tone out of a percussion instrument, like 6 to 1 is not a bad place to be at. Okay, so let's talk about the attack time. Now, with attack time, you're really just saying that after the signal passed the threshold, how fast do you want it to get to its desired gain reduction? Now, the faster you go, the more reduction it can actually do at the same point. Now, the slower you go, the less it's going to do at the same point. Reason being is that, like I said, it's a gradual process. It's not on and off like a light switch. So if the signal were to pass the threshold, and let's say that we have it at the fastest signal, you'll see right here on the graph in red that it's actually going to have a very steep response. So it's going to be fast. But if we have a slow response, meaning that it's going to take a while, it's going to take a quarter of a second to actually get to its desired reduction, it's barely making any move on the reduction. Now, tonally, this is actually a really good thing. That means that we can actually really shape the actual information feeding the compressor. If it's a vocal and you want it to be kind of aggressive in your face, but not really pokey, let's say like in a rock track where like they're almost like yelling sometimes, but it doesn't really sound like it's really poking you in your ear. Well, a lot of times that's a faster compression. Why? Because they want to see that reduction. They want to get that aggressive tone. Let's say you're doing some soul and R&B, maybe some pop records, and you want the vocal to kind of sound like it's poking out once in a while whenever they hit a high note or something. A slower compression would actually be better for that because it allows for some of their vocal to push through before the compression really grabs. Now, let's say you're working with some snares and you really want to hear that pop, then timing the actual attack to just be right behind the transient allows for the transient to bleed through and then for the compression to stick it right behind it. So the cool thing is now you get this really hard hitting snare at the top of the signal, and then the compression will then bring down its tail, making it really sound like it's poking through. This could honestly be described as a faster attack and make things sound a little bit further away sometimes, while a slower attack, because it allows for more information to breathe through and poke right through, makes it feel a little bit closer. So now what happens once the signal actually drops back below the threshold? Now, we spoke about what happens when it passes it, but now once it actually drops below it, now we're really talking about release and hold times. Now, what release is actually doing is it's letting the compressor know that once the signal has fallen below the threshold, how long will it take for the signal to get back to unity? So similar to how attack works when you're doing faster and slower, how the gain reduction will change, except in an opposite motion, the faster the release, less compression is actually happening, and the longer the release, the more compression is happening. So let's switch back to Pro Tools and just kind of take a look at what I mean. So check this out. We're just going to go ahead and reset the attack back to like 15 milliseconds, usually a good starting point for vocals. We're going to leave the release at 180, once again, a good starting point, and we're going to keep to that 2 to 1 that we had set earlier. Now the threshold is a little low, so we're going to go ahead and take that up to like minus 20, and we'll kind of just dial things in from here. Okay, so check this out. We're just going to get enough compression. Alright, cool. That's good enough. Now watch this. I'm going to speed up the release. And we're doing a lot less compression. I'm going to really slow down the release. And now we're doing a lot more sustained compression. Now let's say that I were to take the release and make it fast, drop the threshold even more. Now you'll notice it's compressing and it's releasing very quickly. Now if I do the same to the release and reverse it, it's really holding it down, and you can really hear that level drop. So depending how you actually affect the release time will ultimately tell you, okay, am I getting a louder signal that sounds more forward, or am I getting something that's being held down for a sustained amount of time, making it sound further and quieter? You know, depending what you're looking for, depends what you want to set it to. Now, something that's not always used is the actual hold. It's not always found on many compressors, but on this one, thankfully it is. So let's kind of just take a look at it real quick. Okay, so hold right here is actually allowing us to actually say after the signal has fallen below the threshold, how long do we actually want to hold the amount of compression that's happening? So this is technically just before the release, because once the hold time has expired, then the release timing engages, right? So let's just kind of take a look at this as an example. Right now we have it set to 0. Right now we're just going to pass the signal over the threshold, and we're going to quickly let the signal stop so we can actually see the release time happening. And then when I start engaging the hold, we're going to start seeing how the hold keeps the reduction down. So let's play real quick. Okay, see, that's with a quick release. Now let's engage the hold. Let's put it all the way up to 500 milliseconds. You see, even after the signal has actually stopped, it's still holding the compression down. If I put the hold back to 0, you don't see that same level of reduction hold. And that's because the hold is actually, once again, it's before the release. It's just saying, once it's dropped below the threshold, how long do you want it to sustain the effects of compression so that you can get a certain quality out of the compressor? One of the general applications for this is, let's say that you have a snare sample that you're trying to mix in with like your acoustic snares, but that snare sample has way too much of a sustain behind it. You can actually tell the compressor, okay, after it's gone below the threshold, you know, the initial transient, hold that compression for a little bit longer. Like, I just want it to hold long enough to keep that sustain quieter so that it doesn't have to be blended in so much with the original acoustic snares. Now, I wanted to bring up a specific type of compressor design, which is feedback or feed forward. Now, feedback we're kind of used to already. It's what we see with like 1176s, LA2As, or any compressors that were really just commonplace in the studio. The main reason being that feedback designs are actually controlled after the variable gain amplifier versus before. The variable gain amplifier is what actually pushes the signal up and down depending on what the detector circuit is actually telling it to do. In other words, some people will actually call this the control circuit. Now, the reason that in feedback you could only really ever get the control circuit to respond to the output is because the only way that you could actually get it to respond faster is with the feed forward design, where it would actually split the signal into two directions. Now, in feed forward, it was the same direction on one of them as it was in feedback. It would just go from input to variable gain amplifier to output. The second path was that the signal would then be split off into a sidechain. That sidechain would be going directly into the actual control circuit, which would then tell the variable gain amplifier what to do based off of that input signal. Why not design it already like this? In a nutshell, it's because it would actually cause a delay to the original signal. For the two signals to be split and for it to respond as if it was on time, honestly speaking, you'd have to delay the original signal so that the sidechain would be a little bit faster, causing the compressor to actually react sooner, catching the transients and everything that the older feedback design was not catching. One of the compressors that I actually really like that actually feature this design as kind of interchangeable would be the API 2500. You see this button right here, new and old. So it'll say new, feed forward, and then old, feed back. Now, API actually features this on their hardware. Now, just know that with the feed forward design, you will experience like a tiny amount of actual delay, which when doing something like parallel processing and all that can actually cause phasing. But if you do it in a DAW, most DAWs actually have a form of delay compensation, so you can actually use it with some pretty good success. So let's talk about knees, how it actually engages that compression, whether it's going into it gradually very softly or if it's going to go in and just start that compression right away. So check this out. Right here, this little edge that you see on the actual threshold, that's the knee of it. Now, you can actually soften that knee by changing its curve, usually with a knee filter of some type. Usually on some compressors, like you'll see them just put soft knee as a button. Like I said, with the API, you'll actually see right here, threshold knee. Do you want it to be a hard knee, a medium knee, or a soft knee? Now, this is a lot more easily visualized in the Pro C2 because right here you can actually see as we change it, you can actually see the curve change. Now, let's take a look at how it actually affects the sound. Okay, so for this example, we're just going to start bringing down the threshold. We're just going to kind of look at how the reduction is happening now.
And it shows now, I'm
Did you notice how there's actually more compression happening? But when you actually look at the actual knee and what it's actually doing, right here, the threshold would have actually started later, while as we round the knee, it starts to happen sooner, but not just sooner. We actually see it happening as low as down here as like -50, while over here, we had originally set it to not start till -32. Now, this is actually really important info because this actually means that you're gradually rounding into your compression versus just waiting for that threshold. So the knee can actually create a character behind the compression. Let's say that you want it to naturally feel like it's actually a performance versus just compressor hitting it and then it suddenly got ducked. Using a soft knee would actually be a great idea for that. Versus a hard knee where, let's say that you want it to be something that sounds like there's an impact difference. Every time it hits, it sounds like it's crushing a little bit. A hard knee would be better for that. Now, something else that's actually going to be really helpful for this is going to be using your sidechain filters. Now, sidechain filters are usually how we affect the frequency response of the input detector to the actual incoming signal. But there's also changing the actual material source. So let's just kind of look at how to use the sidechain in most compressors. Okay, so for this example, we're going to go into Pro C2, and first I'm going to show you your input sidechain. Now, the input sidechain basically says, where do you want the actual detector to get its signal from that's causing the compressor to react the way it does? Let's say that I want it to listen to the left channel of the music, then great. Once I actually say external sidechain here in the actual sidechain section of the plugin, I can actually say, listen for that sidechain input and react to that. See, you can actually see that it's responding to the music. Now, if I were to switch it to input, it's responding to the vocals. So once again, sidechain input is from an external source feeding the detector of the compressor, while internal is when we're going to be manipulating the frequency. So let's kind of jump into that real quick, okay? Okay, so this is actually really cool. Let's say that we're just focusing in here on the input. We'll even take the external off because we don't even need it. Now, on the internal, with a lot of plugins that are on the market, you can manipulate this a little bit better than when you can on analog hardware. On some analog hardware, you actually do have sidechain input filters, so you can actually say, oh, have this compressor not respond to anything below 80 hertz. Now, in our case, that may be a little too low for a vocal. So we're just going to engage it and we're just going to start dialing it up. We're going to leave the compression where it's at. We're going to actually slow down this release just so we can see a little more compression happening. Cool. Let's just hit play. Now watch what happens when I start putting the filter up in the range. Did you notice that we're actually getting less compression the more I filter out the low end? It's because we're telling the compressor, don't focus so much on the low end information. Now, this is actually really good because let's say that we're doing a vocal for a baritone vocalist where whenever he belts, his low end might drop a little bit, but his mid-range projects a little bit. So maybe we don't want it to trigger based on the low end of his voice, but only trigger when he belts. So you can actually say, great, I'm going to move this filter around until I get the desired amount of compression. See, we're actually getting a little bit less. We're getting about like 2 decibels of reduction. Now if I pull it back, now we're getting almost double. We're getting 3.5 to like maybe 4 at a peak, right? But that's actually really cool. We can actually use this EQ curve to change what is feeding the detector. Now, this is actually especially useful if there's certain notes that singers are actually hitting.
Gemini, Gemini, glad I got to know you, baby. Gemini, Gemini, you switched up, you're so damn crazy. Gemini, Gemini, glad I got to know you, baby. Gemini, 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 Gemini.
There we go. There we go. See? We actually got it. It's only ducking on that lyric. So let's kind of go earlier in the song and see how it's responding. You see? Because there's not so much going on in that range, the compression is not really triggering. It's doing a little something here and there, but not really. But once Gemini comes in, you see the compression happen. So this is actually kind of the power of these sidechain filters. Like, aside from setting up your attack, your release, and everything to where you want it and where you feel most comfortable, the sidechain will help you get the compressor to kind of ignore certain ranges of the audio. So we're just going to set this back to default. Lou start is kind of where I like to start. It's just everything kind of where I start from. And we're going to kind of go ahead and kind of switch over. We're going to talk about the last thing, which is makeup gain. Now, I know that there's a ton of other things we can talk about, but honestly speaking, every tool has so many new features nowadays that we can go on and on about it. But makeup gain is probably the most important one. So what is makeup gain and why is it so important? Now, makeup gain is basically after all of the processes that you've gone through with getting the compression just right, you're going to notice the goal of compression is to lower dynamic range, right? And usually when you're doing it from the top, it's just going to make things feel quieter. Now, what you want to do with makeup gain is take that quieter, now compressed signal and try to match it to the same volume as the original audio. Now, it's going to be a little hard at first. You got to use your ears because one of them is very dynamic and the other one is potentially very compressed. It's going to be a little bit hard fitting it to actually be able to match, but essentially what you want to be able to do is bypass the compressor and not hear a volume difference. That's kind of the goal. Now, does this mean that you have to always match? No, it does not mean that. But while you're setting settings and you're kind of comparing a before and after and seeing if it's actually the tonal difference that you're looking for, you should level match it. And then from there, if you want it to be a little bit louder, turn it up. Nothing's stopping you from doing that. But generally speaking, if you want to verify your work, level match it and then do whatever you want to do after. Just a small tip for this one. 3 decibels of gain reduction if you're looking at your meters instead of just using your ears. If it doesn't always mean 3 decibels of makeup gain. Sometimes those 3 decibels of gain reduction was literally just at one peak and it wasn't your average. You're trying to match the averages and not trying to match your meters. Okay, so before we wrap up, I'm just going to quickly kind of dial in some compression for the vocal, and we'll just kind of quickly do this. We'll go step by step and see how it sounds. Okay, so back into Pro Tools. Everything's back to our default, like I said. Now let's go ahead and just kind of jump in. We're just going to go ahead and do that pre-chorus, if anything.
You took more than what you gave, and it shows now. I'm saying, and I know that I'll be just fine if I leave this shit behind. No regrets in the words I say. I'm leaving you for me, and I know that I'll be just fine if I leave this shit behind. No regrets in the words I say. I'm leaving you for me.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good. Now, I don't want it to kind of filter too much, but I also don't want it to focus so much on that low end. All right, this sounds pretty good. There we go. That actually feels pretty good. See, once you actually kind of get used to the controls and you know what you're looking for, you can actually kind of dial it in fairly quick. But it doesn't take a super genius, super mixer, Grammy nominations, or anything to actually get good at compression. Just kind of follow this little guide, revert back to some of the sections if you need help. You can always leave a comment or anything for me to kind of answer questions as we go. But to be honest, compression isn't really that scary. I know that, like I said, there's a lot of controls that we can use, but once you actually understand them, you're like, you know what? That's not that hard. Okay, so that's compression on a very basic level. Now, I understand that there was a lot of information, but there's also a lot more that we can go through, to be honest. So if you're looking for more info, if you're looking for more content like this, just feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel, leave a comment, like the video if it helped you at all. Let me know what was most helpful, what you want me to expand more on in the future, and I can actually create more content videos based around that. But for now, I just wanted to say thank you for sticking it out through me. I know this is not a short video, and I know it's not the funnest video, but I really do hope that this was helpful for you. If you're looking for more content from me or anybody that I work with like DK, you can also check out the Mixing Music podcast, which now has just about 200 episodes or more. We've been running it for over 2 years. We are number one in the world actually for music post-production, but it's something that you can listen to. We upload every Tuesday, so go ahead and give that a listen. You can always connect with me on social media. You can check out my Instagram, my TikTok, my Twitter, or whatever, at Mastered by Lou. We can always connect over that. You can send me private DMs. Just say hey. And if you're ever interested in working together, having me mix or master your music, you can always reach me on my website, midsidesound.com. Thank you once again. Thank you for sticking it out. I'll see you guys next time.